Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with 2nd District Congressman Mark Pocan. He's a Democrat. He lives in Black Earth. He's finishing his first term. Mark, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you, Steve.
And a programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mark, 10,000-foot question to start with. 2 years ago you sat here and said, send me to Congress and I'm going to try to make it work better. I just looked it up. Congress approval ratings between 8 and 15%.
Because people didn't understand the question. It should be zero.
It should be zero?
Zero.
Which takes me to my first overview question, which you and I have known each other long enough to ask. Why should any incumbent member of Congress be reelected?
Well, I think it's a fair question for people who are running the operation, because what we've found very quickly is Speaker Boehner has allowed 30 or 40 people, hardcore Tea Party people, to hold all the rest of us, Democrat and Republican, hostage. It's a minority within the Republican caucus that don't want to get anything done. They don't believe in government, so they somehow ran for office to change it, but they found that they can't, so they're doing nothing right now. They're just sitting completely stymieing us, and Speaker Boehner's decided he'd rather be Speaker than to accomplish something. So for the rest of us, Democrat and Republican, there's Republicans on my floor who would be harsher than I am in criticizing the inactivity. It's been very frustrating.
Well, 2 years ago you were an outsider criticizing the institution. Now you're part of the institution. Well, let me ask it this way. What did you do in your first term to try to build, to try to help Congress get things done and passed?
Yeah.
How did you choose to work?
Well, one thing, we've got a caucus called the Problem Solver Caucus, which is unique in that it's a brand new caucus, never before in Congress, that's just to get people together in a bipartisan way to get to know each other. We have some speakers that come in on different issues, but the whole idea is if you get to know someone, you might actually be able to work with them and find out what you have in common, just like I did in the legislature. You know, that's the way you actually pass things.
Yes.
And I did that. So I've gotten to know some Republicans, and we've worked on bills together, but the problem is, you know, leadership still controls what goes on the agenda. So the same Republicans that I'm working with are equally frustrated, because if leadership fails to schedule it, we can't vote on it. And there's a process called a discharge petition, which we've done a few times. You have to get 218 people to sign to get a bill discharged, but then by party leadership, you know, Republicans who maybe well-meaning still aren't allowed to sign it, so it's very difficult to get things moving. So the real problem that we've had is this Tea Party contingent, this 30 or 40 folks that hold all of us hostage. But in the meantime, what I'm doing, if Congress isn't going to work on the legislative side, let's develop relationships with people so that when it does work, which it will work, and I'm very confident by at minimum 2016, I mean, if not sooner, but 2016 for sure. I think there's potential for that. We can get moving again. We've got a lot of things that are backlogged. You know, we've barely gotten budgets. At least that's one positive thing. We started getting some appropriation bills done after 3 years of getting nothing done in Congress.
Running the government by continuing resolution.
Yeah, and
with no budget, with no fiscal game plan.
The highway fund, we're good through May. We didn't do a long-term bill. I mean, all these things.
Pension smoothing,
yeah,
which says we're going to take less from corporations, and so they're going to pay higher taxes. It's a very temporary fix. You're a deal maker. How would you have fixed the transportation highway fund?
Well, first of all, I mean, if we would do things that I think if you had the courage to explain to the public, they would appreciate. You know, we have a gas tax that's largely funded on. If we would just simply index it, because we all have things like salaries and everything else is kind of indexed to things by consumer price index.
Right.
If we did something like that, we don't have to come and have a debate about it each time. If that's the funding source, that's how you do it. Now, I do think there needs to be a debate about, we have a lot of cars that are more fuel efficient. I mean, one of the cars we have is a Volt. It barely runs on any gas. It's mostly electric. So I understand that I'm not paying in the same way. So then we got to figure out how to make sure that that fund is still solvent, even with the rise of more fuel efficient vehicles. but that means you have to have a conversation first. And part of the problem is having that conversation when the Tea Party is saying absolutely no new taxes, no new this, no new that. It's been hard to get done. So this was a short-term, temporary solution, but we were going to run out of funds by the end of August, and obviously that's not acceptable. It would put all kinds of highway programs at risk. But why not look at real meaningful, how do you actually fix the fund? Well, if it's the gas tax for right now, we've had hearings in the Budget Committee with Paul Ryan and Gwen Moore is on there, and Reed Ribble and Sean Duffy, 5 people from Wisconsin are on that committee, where we've talked about maybe a per mile fee could be another way to look at it. But let's have that conversation, and let's figure out a long-term solution, and let's not just do it every year or every few months that we can have a fight again. Let's make a long-term decision on how to get it done, and then we can move on to the next long-term issue that Congress hasn't addressed. But we've reauthorized things that have been stagnant for 11 years that have been past reauthorization we're finally getting around to. I mean, there's a lot of work that has to happen.
Okay, but I have one follow-up question on this. Excuse me, but your party controls the White House and the U.S. Senate. So why do we still have this gridlock, dysfunction / morass? Go ahead.
Yeah, again, in my house, I can tell you the exact problem. You ask Republicans on my floor, and they'll give you an answer, like I said, even harsher than I am, in that 30 or 40 Tea Party people, the most hardcore of the Tea Party, have told Speaker Boehner in the beginning of the session, he came and got some Democratic votes to pass some things because he didn't have the votes in his own caucus. So Violence Against Women Act reauthorization is a good example. He was told if he does that again, he won't be Speaker. So he's choosing to be Speaker rather than actually being the Speaker and putting things on the floor that you pass in a bipartisan way. So it's our gridlock that allows very little to happen. So in the House, just to give you an idea, the Do Nothing Congress in 1948, that did so little, they got dubbed the Do Nothing Congress.
Truman,
in the first year of the session, passed 350 bills.
Yes.
Last year we passed 88.
88.
So if the Speaker refuses to calendar things, and we vote 54 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, we vote to sue the President, we do all of these other kind of nonsensical things, but we don't actually address the meaningful things that we have to do as a Congress, then our House is severely broken. Now, the Senate, where they get things done a little better, is at least they start with a gang of 6, a gang of 8 that comes up with a bipartisan solution, passes something, and then we usually don't get it through in our House. Right. That's been kind of the model. So at least the Senate's kind of doing the work they need to, because they have to do it bipartisan, otherwise you won't get the 60-vote closure. So they're doing it in the right way. Our House is really the broken model.
If your House is a broken model, you're seeking re-election in the 2nd Congressional District. What are you telling voters against this backdrop of a broken U.S. House I was able to achieve? Talk to me about your record the first 2 years.
Sure. I think a lot of the successes, even though the legislative process is broken, where we can get things done, they're still working with agencies. We find, actually, that's one of my surprises, Steve, is that agencies have been far more responsive than I thought they would have. I would have thought a federal bureaucracy, yeah, you're a member of Congress, but they actually are very responsive when we've called them up, send letters, talk to them about highway projects, etc. Constituent relations. We've gotten a lot of things done for people. We have one guy, a small business owner in town, who really thought his bank was trying to foreclose on him. They were doing everything possible to run out the clock, and he would have got foreclosed on. We were able to intervene, find him a program. His payments are $800 less a month than he was paying, and he's keeping his house. I mean, those are the sort of things we can still get done. Committee work, we've been able to get a couple things through the committee I'm on that actually are going to pass through Congress, which is the Education and Workforce Committee. We have a bill specifically at some of the workforce training programs that did get through, and we had a reauthorization on a couple education things that will likely get through. So at least from that level, that's a working committee, and I'm happy that we're able to get some things done. I got put on there in October. So that's some of the stuff. And then part of the thing is I'm trying to talk about the dysfunction of Congress and really talk about some of the bills that have to happen and talk about some of the issues that I never thought as a state legislator was going on until I got to the federal government. I mean, things like a lot of corporations are doing everything possible for tax avoidance, and when they do that, we all pick up for that, or that means we get cuts in education and healthcare.
And that's why you're going to a 2 o'clock press conference.
Exactly. We got a press conference to talk about inversion.
Which is where...
Extremely sexy topic.
Yeah, well, which is where U.S. domesticated corporations reorganize, flee the country for tax reasons.
Yeah, and they flee the country on paper only.
Yes, they reorganize
Yeah, and so everything is still, the ownership is still U.S. based, the physical presence is still U.S. based. The only thing that isn't is they found a way through an inversion, really, which is a loophole, I believe, in the tax law. It's really a subversion of the tax code is what they're doing. Found a way to avoid about $20 billion in taxes. And right now it's mostly pharmaceutical companies and manufacturing, but recently Walgreens looked at doing it. Right. The bottom line is it's a huge hole, $20 billion a year, and there is a 5-story building in the Cayman Islands that is the home to 18,900 corporations.
Wow.
Each one is about that big.
So are you going to sponsor a bill that isn't going to go anywhere, right?
We're talking about it, but you know what? This is starting to get talked about, and there was bipartisan support. This is actually one of the things that I've found, and I've worked on a few times too, are where you can get the left and the right a little bit together. Mm-hmm. A good example a year ago this time was when the president said he was considering going into Syria. Well, there's a Republican member, the former head of the Republican Study Committee, Jim Jordan, very conservative guy, went to the UW at the exact same time I did. He and I have become friendly, trying to work together. And during that break, we were talking to each other. I remember coming back, and I was at a meeting, 3 Democrats, 40 Republicans that Rand Paul put together about how we can make sure we stay out of Syria. So there are things that we can get done, and inversion is one of them, because I think people see that as really something that's giving corporations too much power over individuals.
Well, since you mentioned Syria, let me ask a question that I've got here. What foreign policy lessons have you learned from the crises in Iraq, Syria, Israel, Hamas, and the Ukraine?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest lesson I learned is that the American public is extremely war weary. They do not want us intervening for the sake of intervening. And I think the proof was last year, again, with Syria. We got 2,200 contacts from the district in about 2 weeks. 97% against intervention. Almost every member of Congress I talked to, 90+% against intervention. So that's not Madison, Wisconsin, the Isthmus speaking. That's all of South Central Wisconsin. That's across the country. People are tired of us just getting involved for the sake of getting involved. So I think, right now with Iraq, people are giving a little bit of leeway to the president, because what we're trying to do is save some lives in some areas, and they understand that aspect.
Genocide.
To prevent genocide. However, we're watching it real closely, because no matter what, there should be authorization from Congress. And I don't care if it's a Democratic or Republican president, have us be a part of the debate, because that's what we're supposed to. That's what the Constitution says. So I would like to make sure that we're getting those things done. But, we're, as a public and as a district, extremely wary of us just intervening for the sake of intervention.
The GOP voted, as you said, to sue President Obama. Has he exceeded his authority with the executive orders, Congressman?
If I understand it correctly, he has done fewer executive orders than any president in the last century.
I've seen those numbers, and you're right.
So it's to make that the reason is rather ridiculous. I mean, this is all about ginning up the Republican base. We're in an off-year election. I saw a poll recently where they asked people when the next election was. 2/3 of the people said 2016. So you got to get people out to vote, right? And for them, suing the president is really good for their base. But it's really bad for the country when we were so busy suing the president the last week we were around that when we got to dealing with the humanitarian crisis at the border with all the children, they couldn't get a bill done. And we had to, finally, after a couple additional days or additional data plus, we finally got it done. But it wasn't really done because the bill wasn't a bill that's going to pass through both houses. So again, we didn't do our responsibility as a Congress because the leadership wouldn't allow it. But we can sue the president, or we can vote 54 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I mean, at some point, our job has to be different.
How did you argue as one member of the U.S. House? What should be the nation's response to the 57,000 children who cross the border illegally?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now we know basically what the law is. I heard a number, and again, I'm not sure, I haven't verified this, but what I heard was 55% of the kids have a parent already in the country. I mean, there's a family member, but a parent in the country. So one is just connecting them with their parent, right? That's part of what the law says you can do. Also, these are kids. A 6-year-old, you can't just send a 6-year-old back to Honduras. It's a little more complicated than that. So we have a responsibility to deal with that. Now, I think part of our responsibility is making sure that there's not a crisis in those countries that sends the kids here, but we've been trying to get the word across. The numbers, again, that didn't get the attention was all the kids coming in, but then they completely dropped off. It didn't continue. Yeah. So some of that growing crisis has been averted, but we still have the kids to deal with, and it's a humanitarian crisis. And for quite honestly, some friends of mine in the legislature who put out saying don't send people to Wisconsin.
Representative Craig, Representative Voss, Representative Clayfish.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a backwards response. You can't have that sort of an attitude. I mean, this is something, again, where, we would help people who are coming in with any other refugee situation, much less children from another country. And I do think Congress, again, should have done more, and we still have work to do when we get back.
But the larger the issue there is immigration, of course.
Right.
And with the defeat of Eric Cantor, did that absolutely kill any chance that Congress was going to have enact immigration reform?
I think there's been, Eric Cantor did not lose because of immigration reform, because he was against immigration reform. Eric Cantor lost because in a Republican primary, the Tea Party makes up almost a majority of voters, and they don't like government. Eric Cantor was a leader of government, and they replaced him with someone who wasn't. That's what the Tea Party does. So to me, that's what happened to Eric Cantor. Plus, he probably should have spent more time in his district than in Washington, where he probably spent a lot of time because of leadership. But it wasn't because of immigration reform. However, we do have to get immigration reform done. I think there's a reason why Paul Ryan has still been very consistent on needing to get it done. It's because he ran on the national ticket and saw if we don't get it done, the Republicans will never be a national party again. He knows that they have to help and advocate for that. But it is an important issue. I mean,
how is this a big issue in the 2nd Congressional, Mark?
Oh, again, I think what's interesting is a lot of people think of Madison, especially since that's the largest city in the 2nd Congressional District, as this affluent district, recession-proof, because you have state government, the university, insurance companies. The number of kids who are in free and reduced lunch programs in the Madison School District is like 53%.
It's more than 50.
Right. So when you look
it's been going up, just as it has statewide.
So you look at where the kids are, and so issues like this, we get people who've been living here since maybe they're 1 year old, who want to go to college. They're the dreamers, is how we refer to them kind of generically,
yes,
who want to enter our military and doing work, and do that kind of thing, who then are blocked for various reasons because they're not officially a citizen. We need to do something. If you're an aspiring American and you've been here and you don't even speak the language of the country you came from 17 years ago, it's ridiculous. I think most people think we have to have a logical situation to gain citizenship, but also to make sure we're protecting the border so that we are providing it in an organized way. The problem is Congress, we just voted to basically deport all the dreamers. Our House, it'll never pass the Senate, but that's how reactionary of a response we've had out of the House of Representatives because of the Tea Party. So that can get frustrating, to have a debate with people who, one of my most interesting things that since we got out of session last week, but I think it happened about 10 days ago, Representative Todd Rokita from Indiana, to the situation with the kids at the border.
Yes.
He said, we can't have the kids come across the border into the U.S. because they might have Ebola. How do you have an intelligent debate with someone who's thinking a kid from Honduras has Ebola? It's kind of a ridiculous debate, but that's what the problem is that hardcore right that still runs the House. I think if we got rid of half of that 30 or 40, you could get back to a functioning Congress. And you're not going to beat them. A Democrat's not going to beat a Tea Party Republican. It has to happen within the party, and there are some efforts to do that.
Well, let's circle back to something you said. You said that your hope for that Congress would again function as it's supposed to under the Constitution is rest with the 2016 elections. Have you written off the November 4, 2014 election?
No, and I said that at minimum. I think you could have hope within 2014, but the problem is a lot of the Tea Party folks would have to be replaced in primaries, and I don't think we replaced enough of them in the primary system. Some of these are diehard red districts. This is what happened when the Republicans won as many seats as they did in 2010. I think it was 63 members of Congress lost, 675 state legislatures. They redrew the lines, they gerrymandered them to have Republican districts. The double-edged sword of having a Republican district, it means you have a Tea Party primary in a lot of these districts. So now the tail wags the dog all too often as it does in the House. So the downside of that is, in order to change this gate we have right now, just anything happening, you're going to have a more traditional, Republican beat the Tea Party Republican. A Democrat isn't likely to do it given the makeup of the district. So I'm not saying that you can't. There might be enough people upset that 9% of the people think Congress is doing a good job. In a recent poll, people said they chose cockroaches over Congress, head lice over Congress, Nickelback over Congress. We beat out the Kardashian family and the Ebola virus. That should be a wake-up call for people who are actually in the majority, who have the ability to govern, that we're not doing our job.
You are very, very frustrated. at the dysfunction in Congress. Did you give any thought to not seeking re-election?
It's frustrating, and plus, you're traveling every week. 10 hours a week is about what I spend between transferring in Detroit, waiting for the airplane. It's about 10 hours a week, so I've spent more time in airplanes and airports than I would prefer to. But there's also a big responsibility what has to get done. And since I was able to get it done in the legislature, work with people in a more bipartisan way and actually get things done, I think that improve people's lives, I realized that there's a patience level you have to have.
Okay.
And when people ask, how is it different than when I was in the legislature? In the legislature, sometimes things move like a tortoise. In Congress, they move like an upside-down tortoise.
Oh, wow.
So I just have to have that much more of a patience level. So it is frustrating. Would I be perhaps an easier life if I just spent it living in South Central Wisconsin in Black Earth and enjoying everything there is to enjoy here? Probably, but at the same time, I feel there is a responsibility. And in a Congress where seniority means so much, you have to be willing to go through some of these tough years to get to a point that we can actually get things done. So I'm trying to work at it from that perspective, but Steve, I would lie to you if I told you I come home every night satisfied with the job that Congress has done and feeling that it's been a totally worthwhile day.
Okay, some specific issues. The environment. Do you support the Obama administration's rules on carbon emissions? WMC says it's going to cost this state jobs.
Well, I think we're going to see when they're finalized. Right now, I think they're still in the process,
yes.
And I think there's conversations about that. So we're waiting to see, as it goes. We've had people talk to us about some concerns they have, especially, I think one of the biggest concerns that's probably come out is we've had some folks, especially in the utility arena, who've done some measures earlier than other areas, but because the year they're taking a look at
as the benchmark year?
Yeah, they feel like that might be unfair to them. But I personally, I think we should go to something like a carbon tax, because I think there's a left-right alliance, again, talking about this left-right alliance, but there are some conservative think tanks who say you should pay for what you put in, just like you pay what you should for your taxes. So rather than everyone paying to subsidize some people who are having heavy users, make that be the actual use, because that would allow you to have money to help people then change their facilities so they could have cleaner air requirements. I think that would make a lot of sense. So I think we need to do something about it. I just want to wait to see through this discussion period of what's suggested and where we might want to take it.
Keystone Pipeline?
Keystone Pipeline is entirely in the hands of the president.
Right.
We thought it was going to be decided a year ago. I don't really have any great insight other than the extension gets delayed a few months, and now it's about 6 months.
Is anyone in Washington anymore talking about the still imminent bankruptcies of Social Security and Medicare? Or is that off the
Well, it's
plate?
somewhat off the plate because, it's interesting. There was a group called Fix the Debt, right, that was out there for a while to talk about that.
Right.
Well, they actually ran out of funders and disbanded because if you look at it, we've reduced the deficit anyway, about 60% in the last 5 years.
That's because of growth, right? Largely?
Growth
the
and
economic rebound?
And also pulling troops back and other things that have helped us. So we're at a point where we're down about less than $500 billion for the deficit as opposed to being over $1 trillion. So since that's moving in the right direction, that still doesn't solve the Social Security and other issues, but it's made everything probably a little less on the front burner. I think at some point, though, as we get closer and closer to whatever this date will be where Social Security is going to hit a problem, there's a couple things. If you have immigration reform, you're going to extend the life of Social Security quite a bit because you got younger people paying into the system.
Sure.
So that's one thing that can help in the immediate. And I do predict we'll have immigration reform done, I think, by 2016. I really do. But the other thing we could do is, look at things like lifting the cap. I mean, I really don't understand why something that's a very antiquated idea that at a certain amount you capped taxing for Social Security. Everyone pays into Social Security for their salary until you make about roughly $13,000. You don't pay any more at that point.
Right. Whether you make $2 million.
Yeah, exactly. Why not keep it for everyone paying that same rate? Because you and I are paying in, but then let's make sure everyone pays in at that rate. You do that, you extend Social Security for 75 years. End of argument. It's a very popular program. It's an important program, and that would be a real long-term solution to making sure it works.
Medicare. Fixing.
Medicare, too. I mean, I think, again, a big part of the cost increases in Medicare is just the rising healthcare costs.
Yes.
They've leveled off quite a bit since the Affordable Care Act. There are some measures in there that I can't say are a one-for-one correlation of why healthcare costs have kind of plateaued, but we've noticed since that passed, we've had some plateauing. That will help keep the costs down and help keep a life of Medicare. But I think Medicare is a vital program. It's one of our most popular programs, again, that the federal government provides, and we need to maintain it in every possible way.
What's been the impact of the Affordable Care Act on the state of Wisconsin, Mark?
Well, I think you've seen the numbers. I can give you nationally a little better of a perspective, but 8 million people have signed up for the Affordable Care Act through the sign-in period, more than they predicted. Another 3 million children, 26 and under, are on their parents' policies. Another 5 million people in states that expanded Medicaid have also seen increased health care. That's all people with new access to health care. Wisconsin, Scott Walker chose not to do what he could to help make sure that people in Wisconsin had additional health care. So I think it was a real mistake of the governor to do that. I think he's busy running for president, and I don't think his concern was the people of Wisconsin. It's the concern of the primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire and other states. And because of that, I think a lot of people who should have had health care don't have it in the state.
But there is no consensus in Washington and Congress to fix the Affordable Care Act. Some provisions of it need to be fixed, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So is it going to just bleed to death over the next 3 years?
No, I think where the most of how it's working right now has been delivering for the most part on what's been implemented, but there's parts to yet be implemented, and I think that's probably where more of the issues will happen. So as you extend this to small business that got a year extension and some other areas, that's where we really have to watch it. But you think about the parts that happened. The website was a dismal failure in the beginning, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, this isn't working. But once it got fixed, everything they said would happen happened, and then some, on people getting access to health care. And for the most part, it's been very positive feedback. So if there's areas we have to improve, absolutely, certainly we should improve it. But to somehow, I think that's why you notice the talk 6 months ago, the Republicans were all over the Affordable Care Act, thinking that was their election golden ticket to victory. Now, a majority of Republicans who get it like the program. So I think you're finding that's why it's been talked about a lot.
But are you worried about the Court of Appeals decision? And I know another Court of Appeals went the other way, saying that in states that didn't set up their marketplaces, those residents could not get the subsidies. You worried about that?
We're not to the final place for that yet to find out what's going to be decided. But again, if there are problems, then that's where we fix them. But right now, what we're seeing are successes. And but let's make sure anything that needs to be fixed, we have to be open to fix. Anyone who says there's no improvements needed isn't living in reality.
Another real issue that emerged in your first term, privacy. How secure are emails, cell phone calls? What have you learned about this in the wake of the Snowden leaks?
Sure. This is another one of those left-right. So I know we haven't done a lot of things because leadership hasn't put it on the table. If things were allowed to be voted on, you'd have a lot of things pass because there is bipartisan agreement. This is one where I was on the losing side by about 6 votes on raiding in the NSA because I think they're overreaching on what they're collecting. I think people have you can balance security and privacy without taking advantage of everyone's privacy. And I think we're overreaching on how much information we're collecting. It's not very useful. So I was, and again, Democratic and Republicans voted against it. We lost by 6 short votes to, I think it was 6 votes, but under 10 to have it not happen. And I think that more needs to. And watching most recently, the CIA lied that they were spying on Senate
staffers of the Intelligence Committee,
Yeah.
Senator Feinstein's. Well, have you or your staff done anything differently in light of disclosures like that?
No, because I don't have anything to hide, I guess. But I do think that is outrageous. And for them, the outrageous part is they lied about it. They said it didn't happen, and then it comes out that it did. And quite honestly, I think truly people have to be fired over something like that, and more action needs to happen. So, I'm concerned on that, but I think there's a left-right convergence, people who think that you should have more personal privacy rights, and we need to figure out how to extend that.
The campaign for your re-election has just begun. The election is November 4. Do you want to highlight any differences between you and your GOP opponent, Mr. Theron?
Yeah, for me, I'm just going to try to keep doing what I'm doing. One, trying to find ways to, once Congress works, build consensus and get some things done. So I'm trying to develop relationships with Democrats and Republicans so that we can get some things moving. And I talked about some of the ways I've tried to do that. I think we have to really talk about jobs and the economy more, no matter what. While the economy is improving and we are actually seeing these slow bits of growth amount to something, there's still some people left behind, and I think we've got to deal with that. And I think things like minimum wage has to go up. I think we've got to make sure we extend the unemployment benefits for those who still don't have work because of bad trade deals and other things. I think we've lost a lot of manufacturing and other jobs that people previously had to work with, and they're not going to be in a new economy. So we got to figure that out. So to me, it's still the bread and butter pocketbook issues that are the most important. And then I want to talk about other issues that that I've been talking about. But I think there's a lot of work that has to happen. I'm committed to try and get it done in as much of a bipartisan way. My bottom line is, we may not agree on everything, a Republican and myself, but if I can at least find what we have in common rather than what we don't have in common, you've got something you can start to build. And I think there's still promise for that. So I'm still hopeful we can get something done.
Well, my final question is this: if the Republicans keep control of the U.S. House and win the U.S. Senate, does Washington work even less well because you have the Republicans in control of the legislative branch and Democrat President Obama the executive branch?
Well, there's two scenarios. That could be a total stymie to anything happening, or I think a more likely result. First of all, I don't think the Senate's going to flip. I think it'll be a very tight margin, which with their closure rule puts them still in a bad place, but I don't think it's going to flip. And the House, we're going to try to pick up seats, but it's a tough and an off year to try to take the majority in the House. So assuming you're going to have some kind of divided government, at some point the logical part would be you have to negotiate with the executive branch to get things done.
Yes.
Right now, the Tea Party hasn't allowed that negotiation. So I'm waiting for either John Boehner, if he's going to be Speaker, or if someone else would step up and put, their big person pants on and start leading rather than letting that tail wag the dog. 30 or 40 people who don't believe in government, who somehow got elected by fluke in some cases, and letting them stop everything. I mean, we have a bigger responsibility to do that. And you look at all the issues out there that we haven't done, minimum wage, unemployment, immigration, go down the list, pay equity. I mean, a lot of bread and butter issues. We have to, if they got to the floor, there would be a majority vote for many of those things. Even the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. So businesses can export goods.
Right.
We have 41 Republicans and all but 3 Democrats. All but 3 Democrats signed something to get reauthorization. 41 Republicans have said it. That's more than the majority. But if it isn't get calendared by leadership, it doesn't pass. And that's, again, part of the fight we're having.
Excellent, excellent. Congressman Mark Pocan represents Wisconsin 2nd Congressional District. He's a Democrat from Black Earth. Mark, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.